Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for sponsoring the New Stack's coverage from KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon in Copenhagen, Denmark. Learn more about the CNCF and its technical projects at cncf.io. All right, on a sunny afternoon, it kind of feels like a song, sunny, you know, something like that. But it's, gosh, I think this is like the brightest conditions I've had for a podcast at a conference center. This beats the Byzantine.
And a beach nearby, by the way.
What?
And a beach nearby.
Yeah, there is, yeah. That'd be a wake up.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've seen the sun in Copenhagen, so this is nice.
This is nice. So I'm here with Dan Berg, Distinguished Engineer for Istio at IBM. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Ivan Krugelov, a Principal Developer at Booking.com in Amsterdam.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for taking some time to talk. Service meshes have received so much attention over the past 6 months. When we had our pancake breakfast in KubeCon in Austin, we decided to focus on service mesh, and with that topic then came everyone. And I said this place we were overrun with people. And someone said to me the other day, well, duh, it affects everyone. Service mesh is like, oh, service mesh, yeah, that actually kind of affects me. But I think you were seeing that in the workshops this week, that you said the demand for service mesh technology is just really, really incredible.
Yeah, it's incredibly high. Here at KubeCon, we had capacity 90 for the workshop yesterday, and that was filled out immediately, and then we had 280 on the wait list. So fortunately we were able to get some of the folks into the wait list, but it was basically standing room only. Every chair was taken, and you know how those things go. They're 4 hours long. It's pretty intense, and people stuck it out the whole time through. Yeah. And they wanted more. I mean, if we could have gone longer, they would have stayed longer.
Actually, I attended the one in North America in December, and it was the same. There was a line of people queuing in the front of the doors, and they couldn't get in. So yeah. It's actually like most of the people stayed the entire 4 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that that speaks to all the users out there, and Booking.com has been developing service mesh technologies. Why? And you've been there a while. At Booking.com, as I understand, you were a developer there. I'm sure you were starting to work a lot with APIs in those kind of earlier years. What has happened to the sophistication of APIs that's led to this service mesh that you're instituting at Booking.com?
So that's actually part of my talk, which I'm going to present today at 4. So, I can give you some highlights. So basically, why we started doing this service mesh is that Booking.com is currently transitioning from the monolith more toward the service-oriented architecture, and we embrace a potential phase. We embrace the potential accommodation of the variety of technological stacks, right? Which means that all of them will come with subtle differences, right? And the service mesh, the way I see it, really let us abstract away and kind of consolidate this communication logic in a single place and let it orchestrate from the single place. So that's kind of in a 30-second explanation why we actually started the service mesh.
But proxies have been around a long time, right?
Yes.
I mean, they've been around a long time. The API, really the API management platforms that we saw emerge back in those days, 2007, 8, 9, 10, were all proxies, right?
Yes.
How has the proxy changed?
That's a good question. But I think an interesting observation is that now those proxies, they are actually dynamically configured. So there is actually a difference, at least the way I understand, right? So for example, the proxies pre-service mesh era, they really kind of, you configure them once and they stay with this setup, right? Whereas with the service mesh, the proxy, they are dynamically configured because in the cloud environment, right, things come and go very fast. So things needs to be dynamically reconfigured. So there is always a proxy, and there is always a counterpart which gets this proxy configured. right?
Yeah, and a lot of times I've seen that the proxies are awfully static. The initial proxies that people were using, and like you said, you define them once, and then you build your application. You never really interact with the proxy all that much, right? You just develop your application behind the proxy,
right?
Because it's always behind the proxy, and what that means is that you still have to deal with all the complexity and everything of building your microservices. And what we're seeing with the mesh is removing it from being behind the proxy and just making the proxy ubiquitous across the entire mesh, so it's everywhere. So now, just like with the programming of the mesh, programming of the proxy, as a developer, I can remove a lot of the logic out of my application and let the mesh take care of it. Yeah. And you were mentioning even like adopting the service mesh and why it's important. We're seeing this with other customers as well. They've got these monoliths and they're trying to modernize them, and being able to put an API and a proxy in front of it, a service mesh, have it join the mesh, that monolith will operate and appear as if another endpoint to the other services, but they're all communicating and routing the same way within the mesh. And that's a huge value, because then you can start extending it, and it's not like you're working in a completely different architecture or a different application space. You're working within the same mesh.
So at Booking.com, you are using service mesh technology. How are you using it? Like, what are you guys doing? What is the problem you guys have been having, and how is service mesh helping?
So as I said, like we slowly splitting up this monolith into multiple kind of smaller bricks, right? And we like for the communication between the broken parts, right? We used to have the in-house build a quite sophisticated pro client, which makes sure that like the communication happens in observable way, that there is a retry budget, that there is basically all those kind of reliability features of the of a kind of, how should I say it, of a communication at scale. Like let me put it this way.
Right.
And then the more we start moving toward that way, right, the more we see a need that we really don't want to maintain a client per each language. For example, we have a Java, right? We don't really want to maintain that one. Okay, like we could maintain, but even kind of maintaining two copies always mean that there will be some inconsistency in the behavior, right? Especially in the edge cases, like during an outage. So we really don't want to face those potential situations. And this is where we said, okay, like let's see what's on the market. Let's see how we can consolidate this into a single point. And this is basically
consolidating it.
Yes, consolidating.
What does it do for performance?
For performance, it's actually add a little bit more, because like of course like a proxy means an overhead. Like we use Envoy, and Envoy is a L7 proxy, which means that it's parse full HTTP stack, right? But like what we see is that the cost of this is very acceptable, right? So for example, what we see is the increase. Well, once again, I'm doing a bit of hints on my on my slides. So the increase there is about 1 millisecond, right? Which is like we're not doing high frequency trading, so this 1 millisecond increase we will in most of the cases will not even notice in our graph, because like it's usually kind of in the scale of tens milliseconds, hundreds milliseconds, even a second. So this kind of little delta, it's absolutely affordable price for the benefits which Envoy gives us.
But that's an observation you need to be really aware of.
You do have to be aware of it. I mean, nothing comes for free. I mean, you get all that power and that value. There is a price. The performance, definitely. I've seen that with others. The weather company at IBM is using it as well. And again, it's there, but it's negligible. Other areas you got to watch out for, though, would be because it's providing like the telemetry, like the visibility, all the metrics from all those endpoints. They're going somewhere. They're getting collected. So it does put pressure on other aspects of your solution. Like in the Istio case, the mixer, if you're turning on all possible logging options, it's a lot of metrics that are getting sent to that. So you got to be prepared to be able to scale that up as necessary. So there are pressure points, but the actual data plane, it's from everybody we've been talking to and folks that have been adopting it, everyone seems to believe that it's acceptable given the value.
And here, speaking about the monitoring, I would like to point out is that it's monitoring not on the kind of on the service side, but rather on the consumer side, right? So like the visibility is really from the client point of view. So like if you want to build a SLOs based on this is a very good moment to measure it because it's as close to the user experience as possible, right? We like in our practice, I've seen various interesting cases where kind of if you would look at the problem from the server point of view, there is no problem. It's just like we're running fine. When we actually look at from the client perspective, right? This is where the trouble's like. It's basically we had this issue where we broke a SSL bundle. So kind of from the service point of view, like we find yes there is a bit of deep in the we're working great, but then like on the client side, like sorry we cannot establish a TLS session, so we're done. So and yeah, like the envoy and the service mesh concept really let us get this understanding as close to the clients as possible. This is like I think this is one of the greatest value of the having proxy next to the client.
Yeah, and this is a whole reason why with Istio we decided to go down the path of having sidecar injection, sidecar proxies because of the value you get. Because looking at all the other options, having like a centralized approach or a node level proxy, you lose a lot of information about the client, the source, and you need that proximity to achieve that. So the sidecar, while it does add more containers to the ultimate solution, adds a lot more value.
The sidecar proxy, as compared to what other proxy did you guys look at?
So we were looking at various different options as far as the sidecar versus a node level proxy are the most common in a cloud native experience. The big difference there is that the sidecar runs alongside the application, whereas a node proxy is a single instance running on like the virtual machine or the bare metal system that you might be running multiple containers on. There's pros and cons to both of those models, but as far as an operational context, but at the end of the day, the node level one doesn't have as much resiliency as a sidecar proxy, and it loses information about the client or the source. So we felt that given Envoy and the small size that it takes, the resources that it takes, we felt that it was a reasonable compromise to have the sidecar proxy approach, given the value that you're going to get having that injection at the client side.
So what came of your decision to use Envoy? What did it come down to for you?
So when we started the project, we considered two options, Linkerd and Envoy. We ended up choosing Envoy, and let me just say, come to my talk to learn more about why we actually choose Envoy. Just because I'm really starting.
I think there's a lot of people around the world who won't be able to see that stream, so I think we're okay. If you'd like to share it, I'm sure that the people going to your session will be still fully enthralled.
Okay. So basically, we missed two key features there. So basically, we favorite Envoy because it had support of the graceful restarts. Yeah. So basically, we currently deploy service mesh at Booking. Booking traditionally is the bare metal setup kind of, so we run the hardware, and we knew that in the initial version we were mostly focusing on the bare metal setup, right? And having there a graceful restart was a key feature. And the second was that Envoy in its root is a TCP proxy, and it's kind of this greatly expand the potential scope of Envoy, even though we don't use it actively at this moment, but it's basically let it be enabled for Redis, what's the other marker? CouchDB, they even talk about Kafka routing there. So yeah, it's quite an interesting thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know the history behind Istio and how Envoy became into that, but before IBM and Google joined forces with Lyft, those were three separate projects going along. Right. And IBM, we were working on a project called Amalgamate, which is basically just the routing support with the sidecar. And we were using Nginx at the time, but we were having difficulty with scale and just capacity requirements there. And that's when we
Where did the scale fail?
So it was mostly on just the capacity requirements of running an instance per client, just the sidecar. Just the impact to the overall environment was larger than what we really wanted. As far as throughput and everything, it was fine. I mean, Nginx is a proven technology and can handle that. It was just because we're dealing with volume now, right? Because you're going to be running thousands of containers or thousands of pods, each of them having their own sidecar. That sidecar's got to be extremely efficient. So that's why.
That's interesting.
That's one of the reasons why we definitely went towards Envoy there and pulled it together. And that project actually, that Amalgamate project, became fundamentally the pilot functionality that is now in Istio.
Oh, interesting.
So that was the evolution of that.
Okay.
Yeah, it just happens that, I mean, if you're going to be dealing with scale, you're going to be dealing with, if you're going to be one of the early scaling or if you're one of the organizations that's early to scale APIs, right, and the traffic off APIs, you're going to be encountering these kinds. You would have encountered these issues years ago, like Google did, right?
Right.
Or like other kind of at-scale operations did, like Booking.com. Is this? I guess it comes back to that question about who is this applicable to? Is it more applicable to the cloud services providers and then, the larger kind of service providers who are developing developer tools and who are also, building out these new application frameworks? Or is it, or is there, uses here that many more people will be wanting to try, such as the people who are building out their new application architectures for the first time and using Kubernetes?
Yeah.
Well, so my opinion, I believe it's going to be just about anybody using Kubernetes. It doesn't have to be the large scale. Oftentimes people think that you have to be large scale and have a lot of complexity before you have to deal or have a need for a service mesh. And while the service mesh does help you deal with complexity, it's also quite useful in the small scale as well. Just getting the telemetry from day one and the security. The built-in security. I mean, anyone building an application today having to deal with TLS in their application, it's quite complex and difficult to manage over time. And everybody's application, you start off small, inevitably it's going to grow. It's going to get big. I haven't seen anyone start off with, I've only got 3 services and I'm going to run that for 20 years. It's going to grow. It's going to get larger. You're going to put more applications into the cloud. They're going to get larger and you're going to have to deal with the complexity. So it's good to get that in there initially and get good practices in. The other thing I like about the meshes, even on the small scales, it helps to reduce risk. I'm a big fan from a DevOps standpoint. If you're building cloud native applications, you're always trying to reduce risk. And the way that the service meshes help with that is not just the telemetry and the visibility, but when you're rolling out a change, you can roll changes out, but it just expose the visibility to a small set of your population and not everybody at the same time. Without having to go through a very complicated rollout, rollback process, I'm not a big fan of, let's roll it out and see if anything fails, and if it fails, roll it back. I like with the service mesh, you can roll it out and then gradually introduce more of your population to it. And if it does fail, then back off, right? So it definitely helps in that regard of reducing risk to your overall service.
So in my opinion, so first of all, I don't think that the a service mesh concept and the Kubernetes they tightly coupled. It's basically there is a service mesh and there is a Kubernetes, right? So service mesh is more about the communication model. So I think that adaptation of the service mesh, in my opinion, depends on the state in the organization, how, for example, how well established your frameworks, procedures there, because a service mesh certainly has a cost, right? Yes. So it depends on the domain, depends on the situation and organization. In some places it can be applicable. I would definitely recommend everyone to kind of get acknowledged themselves with the concept, what it means and how it works, right? But then kind of the actual implementation, I think it's basically so how should I say, if you have a very kind of strong technical culture, they say this is the stack which we use, and it already has all the features inside, right? So for example, we have this, I don't know, we use what's the name from the Netflix?
Netflix OSS libraries.
Yes. So basically, if you already use it, so then they gave us a reliability feature. We have a built-in, monitoring visibility features, right? So then maybe you can say, okay, we're good to go. But I completely agree that things grow and things changes, right? So eventually, it's very likely that you will need it.
Yeah, right. Definitely, without a doubt, those convergence of factors have affected Booking.com. I mean, you guys are thinking about these factors all the time for your customers, right? And so, with these convergence of factors in mind, how are you thinking about that observability, right? Beyond just the kind of the implementation of the service mesh, beyond the implementation of the service mesh in itself, then the overall management kind of of the overall kind of application platform that you're developing using service mesh and thinking about observability. Is that a next dimension, or what is the next dimension for you when you're thinking about your own service mesh and and optimizing it?
Okay. I think that Service Mesh will really help us transition to the SOA, and it's also not helping us from the technical point of view, but also helping us from the, how should I say it, even from the kind of organizational point of view, because it's kind of facilitate the introduction of new services, because it's the entry barrier became kind of way lower, because like right now to have an advanced sophisticated behavior, it's actually there by default, right? So it really kind of helped business to grow. In terms of manageability, like we're still in the process where we're not full in this in the service mesh, right? So we're kind of still in the maybe somewhere in the middle, but like I think like when we'll be 100% full on, it will. Like the service mesh will allow us to have the central management point for the internal traffic, right? Which is super cool, because now we can say that okay, like now all the communication are obey these certain rules, right? And this is how they behave in terms of when we face some problems, right? So I think like from the manageability point of view, it will be very beneficial. Yeah, but that's something which we're still kind of exploring, right? So this is what I anticipate, and we'll see like how it goes when we're there.
And it's an interesting aspect. I mean, the service mesh is there to manage complexity, right, and help you with that observability. The downside of a service mesh is it also introduces a level of complexity as well. Now you're dealing with, you've got all this value of being able to define your routing rules and your policies, your security policies, but now those have to be managed as well. So one of the things that really advising folks on, what's nice about the service mesh is it's declarative. You can program it from a central point, as you were pointing out. You got to get that integrated into your CI/CD process, your DevOps processes that you have. How do you deliver code into that environment? The service mesh is a set of code as well. It's configuration and code for your environment. That needs to be controlled and delivered in the same manner into your environment. It's a very controlled, very well-defined process. So you basically check in your configurations into Git, and then those get rolled out through the process. And you really need to have that level of maturity when you're developing microservices and cloud native, and the service mesh fits right in very nicely, because it's another set of declarative models that you can capture in Git and roll it out as part of your process.
Actually, the way we deploy changes in the service mesh is almost undistinguishable from the way we introduce changes in the code. It's just that here's the Git repo, here's the deploy process. You just like follow the standard.
That's right, and that's how it should be. It shouldn't be any different. Even if you're just changing routing rules, you should do a Git check-in for the change in the routing rules.
But that does require. I mean, it may seem so kind of, straightforward in a way. Right. You know what you're saying. But it takes so long to get to that clarity, doesn't it?
Well, yes. Like there is a quite a long education process, right? So, and that's also what we face, because that's a new model, right? So, like we have quite a lot of people, so we need to explain them, we need to educate them, and like this conference, probably this podcast is part of these efforts, right? So, right. We need to explain people that hey guys, like this is how we can do also things. We can also do things.
And I do believe that as the community matures, I mean, Kubernetes has a strong community around it. You're going to see more capabilities, more tools, more projects that are going to help people in that regard as well. The community's kind of ignored it. They've forgotten their roots a little bit, right? And so we're going to see, and we were talking about this earlier, we're going to see the reinvention of the DevOps days here at KubeCon.
I think so.
And they're going to, because it's natural, that you've got to have, it's there, and maybe people have started to take it for granted, and we really need to get back to the roots and describe how that actually fits into the overall process.
That's good point. I think too what we were talking about earlier is like who's the service mesh for? Is it for the operator? Is it for the developer? But it's really kind of a very contextual kind of thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think it has both benefits and the kind of burdens on the both end developers and the ops people. So it's basically just a technology which has its own set of pros and cons, right? And you just need to weigh them before you want to apply them. So
and that's a friction point. Then it becomes a DevOps exercise.
It definitely becomes a task. Whose responsibility is this?
What's the feedback loop saying? You know what?
Should I, as a developer, be changing the security policy?
Yes.
I don't know. Did you trust me to change the security policy?
Oh, is that outside the parameters of the security policy I can change or not?
Yeah, right.
Oops, I just did a fat finger, so now the traffic is out. Instead of 100%, it's just 10% or something like this, right? So
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I do envision that we'll see more tooling around that.
Yeah.
Because you're building, we're working with enterprise customers, right?
Right.
And compliance and security are key requirements here.
Well,
the service mesh helps a lot, though, with all of that.
That would be another kind of question I'd have to follow up is about the networking, right? You know, and what role does that layer play, in the overall kind of stability, of the server mesh overall.
Right. I mean, the network, the service mesh is. It's funny we use the mesh is a network.
Yeah.
Right. It's a configurable network.
Yeah.
Is basically what it is. So the network, you can't have a service mesh without discuing the network. It's super important here.
Yeah.
Right.
And it opens all the stories for like these, the overlays.
Yeah. Well, it's also the coming together of the service mesh and in Kubernetes the CNI project.
Yeah.
Bringing those together is a natural fit, right? Because they work together. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're both working together. You're running the mesh on the CNI that you have within your environment. So it's only a natural progression. And I do envision that we'll see things like unifying some of the policy support. Because right now, like Kubernetes has network policies, but then in Tigera and Calico, you got policies as well that work at a different level. It works at the node level versus at the application level or the pod level. And Istio is focusing more at the application level network policies. So you got various levels, and it can be quite confusing. And I do envision that as we progress forward, we'll try to unify those to simplify. I just want to set network policies from the scope of the application and just have it apply correctly.
So I just would like to conclude just by, from each of you talking a little bit about kind of things from a different perspective, and then we'll finish it up. But, my question for, Booking.com is like, what do you need to invest in to kind of like build out that team? Does it, what is that investment that you're having that you're making, in your organization to kind of facilitate kind of the, the further adoption of this capability?
I think we can definitely need to keep investing into the getting the operation knowledge. So, for example, of Envoy in particular and for example, Istio. Right, we definitely need to invest into the educating people, right? Like this is for sure. We need to explain people. This is how it is. This is how to operate it, right? And I think this is probably the two biggest challenge in which we're currently facing, and probably will be facing in the coming year or so.
I'm waiting to see on Monster.com a service mesh engineer.
Yeah. Must have
come
10
up with the most ridiculous.
Must have 10 years experience. Must have 10 years experience as an SRE.
Cloud native specialization in service mesh, right?
That's exactly. I'm waiting for that job description to come up.
So what resources need to be invested in the community around Istio?
So resources, I think resources right now will be just, we talked a little bit about we talked about the complexity that is introduced. I mean, it's solving a problem, but it introduces. So community has a big opportunity right now of helping to make service mesh more consumable.
Yeah.
Visualization, I'd love to have a visualization tool, right, that visualizes my my policies and my routing rules and their effects. I'd like to do dry runs and see what will happen if I apply.
So I'm a bit of a layman to this. I'm a little of a layman, right? I don't, I'm not building out service mesh technologies. I'm writing stories about service mesh. And so, but one of the questions I have is when you're thinking about all that data, right? And like, passing in a service mesh, right? It's like this crisscross. That's Kubernetes, right? In itself, it's like a hive, right? There's a lot of interest in Prometheus, right, as a graph database underneath, and Grafana as a visualization, tool. So, are there some parallels in applications that might apply to service, to the service mesh story to help it be more visual, like you're saying, because you say how much you love that.
Well, with this, Istio we have built-in support for Prometheus and Grafana Dash. We come with Grafana dashboards as well for the mesh, and they definitely help, right? You can visualize the metrics. But when I'm saying visualization, I want to see a visualization of not the metrics coming out of it, because that's there.
Rather the
I want to see the resources, the relationships.
Yes.
The relationships of just not the services, but the mesh resources and their effects on those services.
Yes. So, for example, one of the things which we realized moving forward with Service Mesh is that Service Mesh will not only help us manage the communication, but it also will help us manage the dependencies.
Yeah.
Because it's basically the rules of these network policies. They define who can talk to who, right? And this is basically, okay, I am a service B, I'm a service A, I'm dependent on these three services, right? And you can really visualize them. And this is,
the mesh is defining that dependency stack, and we're just not doing. We've got some toy tools to start visualizing it, but there's a lot of opportunity in the community.
Yes.
You guys, I think you have a startup here. I mean,
maybe we should. Nice idea, yeah.
I know VC did contact me earlier, so they're coming by. They're European based. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it. It helps me understand the space much better. So I appreciate your clarity, and we'll be back soon with more podcasts. Have a great show, you guys.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for sponsoring the New Stacks coverage from KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon in Copenhagen, Denmark. Learn more about the CNCF and its technical projects at cncf.io. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.